Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Carvell Taylor, and Bob asked me if I would talk about my time at Selma, and I'm happy to do that. And as I was thinking about how I should do this, it occurred to me that we really needed to talk about the Episcopal Church and what the church did. Yes, I was there, definitely, but I was surrounded by groups of Episcopalians. So I want to talk about the Episcopal Church and at least my knowledge of what individual and group Episcopalians did, including my husband. Now, there are a number of people here as I look around who are going to remember these times, but perhaps we've got some young people here that don't remember these times, so I want to bring you up to date on what it was like. First of all, this was really, really scary. It was a frightening time. And the reason was we didn't know what was going to happen. Now, looking back, we know what happened. And most of it is positive. But at that time, we didn't know what was going to happen. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we could have been killed. People were killed. Our Episcopal martyr, Jonathan Daniels, who we've spoken of, who was a friend of mine, was killed, an Episcopalian, and now, thank goodness, he is now in our lectionary, and we do recognize his passing and his great sacrifice. So, just before I start, I want to remind you what it was like, take you back to those times. African Americans and Caucasians in the South could not sit down together at a table to talk or eat. There was no possibility that an African American could go and sign into a hotel or a restaurant. If they wanted to go to a movie, at least in Portsmouth, where I grew up, there was a back step, and they could sit at the very, very back of the balcony in the Concourse Theater and be very quiet. If they needed to go to the doctor, there were some Caucasian doctors that would treat African Americans, but they had to go after hours, wait in line, and get at the back staircase. Segregated schools, and those schools were not equally funded. Everybody knew it. Housing was completely segregated. There were red lines. This was true North and South. I'm just talking about the South. The North had its own problems just as severe. There were dual public restrooms. You go into any place, and you'd see colored, and you'd see white. And if you switched around, you were in big trouble. Drinking fountains, colored, white. There was voter suppression, poll taxes, incredibly stupid quizzes that people couldn't possibly pass. And by the way, we know that this is happening in the end. Okay, everybody knows that. Limited access to professional education and jobs. There were, of course, African American lawyers and doctors, but they were not able to go, at least in the South, into the Caucasian universities. And of course, it was impossible to get a mortgage or a bank loan. And that was true North and South. And the worst part, at least where I came from, and I am not, there is not a northerner in my background. My family is from Tennessee, Georgia, and South Carolina. So I am entirely a Southerner, and these families were there before the Revolution. And so I will tell you that I do know that the police and the structure supported all of this. So that's the background that we were moving into, and of course it was much worse the farther south you got. I want to talk about Christian responsibility and our call to minister to the least of these. And by this, I don't want to in any way put down our minorities, but as a matter of fact, minorities are minorities because they are considered the least of these. And just want to have how many people have ever considered themselves in a minority? In a minority. Women. One time I was the only woman executive in a company that had 300 men executives, and it was me and 300 guys. And I would say that that's right. I would say I really like this report. Unfortunately, I like men, so that's not a problem. And then we think about, of course, again and again and again, the stories that Jesus told. I think of Lazarus and diabetes. Lots of warnings about what happens if we don't pay attention to the inequalities in our society. I mean, he says it again and again and again and again and again, right? I mean, and sometimes we listen and sometimes we don't. And remember that Jesus himself and his family were homeless for a while. Imagine what that was like, fleeing from real danger, and I imagine they had a backpack and a donkey, and that was about it, heading off to homelessness. So we are talking as Christians of people that really, really did start off from a pretty poor minority type background. As I said, I was part of a group of Episcopalians that were nationwide. There was an organization called the Episcopal Society of Cultural and Racial Unity. Dick Ullman, he's here, might know of that group. You know that? Yeah. It was called ESRU, which is a kind of a weird acronym, but it was. This was the society that was really in almost every parish in the Episcopal Church, and I was a member of that group in my parish at Christ at St. Paul and the Redeemer in Chicago. I want to talk for a minute about my husband, Father Taylor, the Reverend Robert Taylor, who was a Norfolk native, who really was from the first families of Virginia. I wasn't. I'm from farmers. But his middle name is Page. That might seem familiar to Virginians. And his family gave the land that Bruton Parish is built on in Williamsburg. Just to give you an idea of the antiquity of his background. But he wanted to study not at Virginia Seminary, but to get out of Dodge, so to speak. So he, with me dragging behind, decided to go to Seabury Western in Evanston. And then he began to work in prison ministry and ended up being chaplain at Cook County Jail and starting an amazing halfway house for released prisoners called St. Leonard's House, which is now just the most amazing place. It has residences for men and women. It has a fully accredited high school. It has a building for vocational guidance, a full accredited high school, and an eviction program. It's wonderful, and Bob was one of the founders of this place. He and the man that he worked with, Reverend James Jones, pretty much saw that a lot of the reasons for the numbers of people getting into difficulty in Chicago had to do with segregation. And at that point, he became involved in the civil rights movement, and I followed along behind. I will not say that in any way was I ever a spearhead, not initially at any rate. You know, I was home with 4 children. I didn't have the academic background that I do now. Home, the wife of a priest. But in 1961, he came to me and with tears in his eyes said that he had planned and wanted to go on a freedom ride. And my heart sank because as Southerners, we knew what could happen. And there were 16 priests, and I have a book here when he got, being passed around, right? Can you see where it is? Do you see? So, open it up and you'll see his picture there. Reverend Robert Taylor. Yeah. And this is a book about all the people that were arrested in 1961. But what am I going to say? I mean, what are you going to say when your husband has to, it's a call to duty, really. And so he wasn't asking my permission, of course. He was telling me what he planned. And okay, so we had to do it. And the youngest was 6 months old, and off he went. and the Freedom Rack was right behind that bus that was burned. I really didn't think I was going to see him again. I really, you know, again, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know that these people are going to be heroes. Fortunately, of these 15 clergy, they all wore their clergy collars, and I think, it being the South, the chances of their getting hurt was fairly slim. So they didn't have a problem. What they would do, they did have two or three African-American priests with them. They would leap out of the bus, run into the bus station, sit down at the bus counter, and then switch off in the bathrooms and the drinking fountains, and people would see all these clergy, and it was really, you know, pretty shocking for these little towns. But then they got to Jackson, and he got arrested. And he's the only Southerner. So he was there for, I think, 3 weeks before they finally let him out. A couple of things happened that were interesting. His college roommate was a really fairly established businessman there in Jackson. He came to see him every single day, risking his business. And I think that was just an amazing thing. The second thing was that everybody lost weight, really lost weight, but Bob. And why? Because they were eating sow belly and black eyes and grits and cornbread and collards and kale and everything Bob loved. But these Yankees, the sow belly would come in and have hair on it. Bob, you know, he loved it. He ate it. He gained weight. They would give him his food. They all lost weight. One of the advantages of being a Southerner. But anyway, back he came. I have the letters I wrote him, but I don't know what happened to the letters he wrote me back. There weren't very many. But I do have the letters that I wrote him that are now in the archives at the Diocese of Chicago. And the fact that he might change me, I mean, that was brave, wasn't it? It was unbelievably brave, because he could have risked his job. In fact, he did risk his job, because he and the director of St. Leonard's were both there, and the board didn't like it. Northerners are a lot more difficult than Southerners, and I'll tell you that. I was so shocked at the attitudes and the language that I found up in Chicago. It was shocking. So I would never let them off the hook. I'd take the South with all of its institutions anytime over the racism that I saw in the North. So there's a context. There's a context of Episcopalians. Bob was there in 1961, and this was now 1963. And we were watching television, and I just saw those people getting beaten up on that bridge. I mean, how shocking is that? If you go to that movie and see the people there in that town doing what is their right, which is to gather and march, and the way they were beaten, it was horrifying to see that. Did anybody else see it? Yes, right.
It's on the TV.
On TV, right. And I just thought, this is, I don't care who they were. It wasn't about race. It was about American citizens being actually beaten by authorities in front of everybody. You know, they didn't care. They knew there were cameras. They didn't care. And so I knew, being a Southerner, and not just somebody from Virginia, but somebody from Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, all those families, I knew that the racism in the South was there all the time, but hidden, much more hidden. This was so blatant and so unusual, because these people that attacked African American citizens usually came out at night, didn't they? Sometimes they wore their hoods, not so much recently, but they would come out at night. And so here it was in the daytime. Again, let me say that I don't think the idea of Christian responsibility just all of a sudden appears. There's a history. In my case, my grandfather, L.R. Reynolds, an amazing man from Tennessee, was part of the Rosenwald Foundation. Does anybody, does that ring a bell?
I didn't hear what you said.
Rosenwald Foundation. The other ones with the one-room schoolhouses that they put all over the South. Julius Rosenwald was a founder of Sears. He was actually from Kenwood in Hyde Park in Chicago. Huge mansion. He took his fortune and put it into a foundation that had two arms. The first arm was to have African American schooling, and these there are a couple of the Rosenwald schools, I believe, in Chesapeake that are still there. One of them has been preserved, I think. They're now being preserved all over the South. One-room schoolhouse, he sent in teachers from the North, and they were free to African American students. That was one arm. The other arm is in each southern state, he put a director whose entire job was to stop lynchings. And my grandfather was that man for Virginia. Most amazing man, amazing man. He would go into little towns like Zuna and Franklin and all these little towns, and this man could call the birds out of the trees. He would have the power structure from both communities sit down for lunch, and this is in the 20s, the 1920s. And he would give a program, usually bringing in African American students from the university to sing some spirituals, which everybody expected, but then had them switch to Mozart or to Bach, as they could do. And then he would set up a means for them to communicate if any of the community knew there was going to be trouble. Phone calls, messages, agreements. And so I grew up in that household, not really realizing how extraordinary this man was and that his job was. Not till later, until I read all of his notes and everything, but there was an atmosphere in my house of Southern progressive liberalism, and the idea that people are indeed created equal. So I decided to go to Selma. Well, there was a group in my church that had decided to go, two clergymen, and there were 5 of us. And we got on a plane, and we flew to Montgomery at night. There was a van waiting for us. We got in the van, 2-lane highway to Selma, about an hour south, and of Montgomery. And as I was I am very apprehensive because I am a Southerner and I know what could happen to us on those dark roads. It was black as pitch, no light. But I was with a group of Northerners, I mean, not to put them down, but they were, this is like, they were laughing and joking, and, I'm thinking, oh my God, what kind of roadblocks could we be running into? And as we would go down the road, there'd be these side roads, and there would be cars there with their running lights on. Well, who are they? You know who they are. And so I finally said to people, look, people, pay attention to where we are. I mean, this is really, really scary. But we were okay. We went into the African American community, which was a prosperous community in this little town of Selma. The church, if you've seen the movie that they showed, that's the church. It's a big, I think, Methodist church, maybe Baptist. It held a lot of people. And I don't remember where we stayed. I think we all stayed in homes or in the church on cots. That somehow this all came to be. It just seemed to happen. There was plenty of food, wonderful food, the sort that we are all used to. Fed out of the church kitchen, these amazingly wonderful, unfrightened, strong people that were a whole lot better than I was, that's for sure. There was a sense of solidarity, and we weren't the only ones that had showed up. There were lots of Episcopalians. Lots of Episcopalians. We all found each other. Probably 50, 60 of us. But Christian people and people of goodwill from all over this country had the same feeling that I had, that this couldn't continue. So thousands and thousands of people showed up. The place was packed. But the thing, again, that was frightening, remember, we didn't know what was going to happen. There was no protection. There was no police. People said the FBI was there, and oh well, they were all from Alabama. and Hoover was not a friendly person at all to this movement. In fact, he tried to set King up, as you recall. So there we were, milling around, meeting in the church, this amazing sense of solidarity. I've never experienced anything like it ever before or since, and maybe something like this maybe will never happen again. It might have been a unique event. And there would be speeches and talks, and then people would just spontaneously begin to sing, holding hands. Amazing. It would be Everything We Know, We Shall Overcome, Wade in the Water, Children, Follow the Star, This Land Is Your Land, If I Had a Hammer, all those Peter, Paul, and Mary songs. It just sort of happened spontaneously. The music and the solidarity and the feeling of togetherness was, I don't know if I can explain. It's sort of when we're at a really wonderful place in the communion service on a high holiday, and there's that feeling of all of us being together. It was like that you could then translate by 60%. We thought we were going to march, and I couldn't stay more than 3 days, that's it. Because Bob and I were, he would have the kids, and then we were going to switch off, and he was coming down. So I thought I would do part of the march to Montgomery, and we all gathered before the bridge, and he called it off. Wisely so. The police had moved back, but, like the movie said, there was no protection whatever. And this was truly the rural South. It was, I don't think, well, maybe the western part of Virginia was sort of like that. It was really isolated. Once you got out of Selma, got out of the towns, you were in deep, deep country. And walking along that two-lane highway, there was no protection whatever. So he was politically a genius. He wanted to stop the march until they got the court order. Well, by that time I had to leave. At that point, I wasn't feeling afraid at all, because the solidarity of thousands of people, we might have had a sniper or something like that. That was possible, but I didn't really think that was going to happen in the town there with so many people. So at that point, I began to feel calmer. I was with a lot of Episcopalians. We were all together. It was a joyous, wonderful occasion. It's so funny, growing up in Portsmouth, we had household servants, of course, all African American. We didn't know anybody. We didn't know anybody. There was black here, white there. We didn't know anybody. We knew people that worked for us, but we didn't know who they were. Not really. They weren't going to tell us that they weren't perfectly happy. Everyone thought they were. Of course they weren't. That is a ridiculous thought. I mean, these people really wanted what we had, which would be a home, a car, a good school, safety for the children, food. And much of the time that was denied them, and it was denied them by law. I have to tell you, and I've told a number of people this story, it is the most wonderful story about the Episcopal Church. In Selma, there was an establishment Episcopal church. You can imagine it, a great block of stone. Beautiful, beautiful, probably 1890s type church. Not gloomy, a beautiful neo-Gothic type parish. So all the Episcopalians, there were probably 40 of us, decided we'd go to church. Is it a political statement? Of course. Is it going to church? Absolutely. So there we were, black and white, number of clergy with their collars, black and white, us, all dressed up. We didn't just slouch there in our jeans. We had nice-looking clothes. So we went to the church, and there we were, 40 of us, black and white together, and the ushers denied us entrance. And what? Oh, yes. No, can't come in. So we knelt down in front of the church. The Lord be with you type of situation. There we were. And just before church started, here came a little old lady. Anybody that's been in the Episcopal Church can have her in your mind because this is the lady with the money. Of course, I'm a little old lady now. Probably a hypocritical story, but it would be typical of a man, as a matter of fact. Well, that was what it was like. And then they asked us to coffee hour, which was so pretty shocking, and we couldn't believe it. We went and talked to people, and it was just a bunch of Episcopalians together as we would be today. And then I got on the plane and went home. And then Bob went on the march to Montgomery. We both survived. We both survived it. King came to Chicago. That was scary too, because the schools were segregated. African Americans could not go into the Loop to a restaurant. Was there police? No, they'd just be harassed. There's no law against it, but they couldn't go. They would never be served in the Loop in the middle of Chicago. Things like that. This non-institutional racism that happened in Chicago. The schools were completely segregated, not by law, but by fiat. So huge marches. Bob was arrested. I was arrested. Spent a disgusting afternoon in Cook County jail before they let us go. Pure harassment. My children got picked up. It was a really stupid time there in Chicago, and then of course the whole thing fell apart. And they had to integrate the schools. People were, again, like a dam breaking. That was not institutional racism. It was against the law. It was reinforced by the police and by the power structure of the city of Chicago. So that's my story. It was a time, looking back on it, where things have improved. There's no question about that. I have a number of African American clients, and when they're young people, I tell them the story because I want them to know the story. And it's like they can't believe that people couldn't drink out of any fountain they wanted to. And these are young African American people in their 20s, 30s. And when I think, well, there's a mindset that has indeed changed. But has it? And so I don't know what anybody here thinks about what needs to be done. It certainly has to do with the heart, not with the law. Myself, I write letters. I write letters to our legislators. I talk to people about the things that they need to do. It's a very subtle kind of racism that we have now that I think, hopefully, as my generation passes on, which seems to be the worst perpetrator right now, that things will improve. But I do think that Christian people are called upon to search their hearts, their conscience, to be aware of the things that went on, the sacrifices that people made. I think the younger generation is in better shape. I honestly do. And good for you, the younger people that are here. Good for you good for you. I see you. Good for you. Keep on doing it until we get to the place where we really are colorblind, and we're not. And I mean that in terms of people who have been designated as minorities, where we're looking at people for who they are, getting to know who they are, what they're like, rather than what we see that they look like. I do think that prayer is important. I think we need to pray for unity, for justice. I think our personal prayers need to be pushed in that direction. I think prayer does have the ability to move mountains. And I think that here in our parish, as the atmosphere is changing here from a suburban type of setting to really urban, when you think of town center not being very far away, welcoming people who come who don't seem to fit the mold. And that is one thing that I do notice here, that everyone here is very welcoming. I don't feel this, oh my goodness, who's that person? You know, whoever shows up, shows up. And I'd like to know if anyone has any thoughts about this, because I don't have a conclusion. I think that things are better. I think that we'll probably not have these huge demonstrations again like this. The fact of that amazing solidarity, maybe we'll see that over some other issue, but that time is now gone, and we're left with its memories and its bittersweet truths. Any ideas? Any comments? Yes.
One of the things that really struck me when you were speaking, it really brought tears to my eyes hearing about you talk about how free it felt in that church when you all came together, and not only in the church, but in the first place you gathered. Was that a church also? If you see the movie, that big African American church, that's the church, and I think they must have filmed it there because that's what it looked like. It's a huge church, big. I think it's a Baptist church. Yeah.
But what struck me was that fear is at the root of everything.
Yes.
And to hear how in the really it had to have been the Holy Spirit there bringing everyone together and the singing and everything, and that once you felt the community and the joining together, that the fear wasn't there anymore.
That's right. And that solidarity overcame whatever was out there. I mean, it became inconsequential. All those police, everything that could happen, the fear, the individual fears that people might have, that solidarity, that prayerful, we shall overcome feeling of solidarity with all those people, it minimized. I mean, these people became nothing. I mean, it didn't really matter that these people out there were glowering at us. It didn't matter at all. I mean, it became minimal. And you're absolutely right. It was that powerful feeling. It was amazing. And it crossed, I mean, there were all kinds of Christian people there. I mean, everybody. And also many that weren't. That just were citizens that were just shocked. But it was, I really, as I think back, it was primarily a spiritual movement. No question. Anybody else?
I haven't seen the movie. Have you seen it? And did you feel it was an accurate?
Absolutely, down to the last minute accurate. Of course, it's a movie, not a documentary. And so she takes some liberties. One of the things that was really interesting was there was a split in that leadership between these amazing, who I knew all of them, firebrand people from Coral, which was a college, a black American college level, and SNCC. Those two were really, they were, let's go straight at them, we'll go, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then the older, you know, none of us were very old. I was 27, Bob was 29, and King was in his early 30s then. So this is, you know, looking from now, this is a young people's movement in a lot of ways. But these people that were such firebrands were college students. They were 10 years younger. And there was a split, and that does show that. I don't think she was accurate about Johnson. I really don't. I think his heart was always with these people. I am a great admirer of his movement as a Southerner. It's just really hard to stand up and say that you're for civil rights, and here's the president. I just can't see in my heart that he colluded with J. Edgar Hoover. There is a scene there where they're talking. They're not colluding. He hated Hoover, who was blackmailing him. he was blackmailing King too, but he was blackmailing. You know, LBJ was no paragon of moral virtue kind of things. But, and Hoover knew about it, and he was blackmailing him. But as a matter of fact, he did sign the Civil Rights Act, and all of this came to be. And of course, people are trying to chip away at it. It's really shocking. I don't know what we should do about that, but I think in the long run that right will come out. I always believe in the right thing in the long run. Till then, there are an awful lot of dead bodies, trying to work on that, but in the long run, I think the right will out. We have 5 minutes. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, yes, Earl. Okay, one more, and then Earl would like to read something that he has from him.
Last fall, Father Bob suggested that if you had the opportunity to read the letter that Martin Luther King wrote from his Birmingham jail. I put in Google the information, and this is one of the books that came up from this is Virginia Beach Public Library. It's called Gospel of Freedom. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail and the struggle that changed the nation. It's written by Jonathan Ryder, published in 2013, so it's a very recent publication. The part that I want to mention was the letter. King was in jail in Birmingham. This is in 1963. So what has been described about Selma was followed by horrible lynchings, by bombings, including the hotel in which Martin Luther King had been staying in, castration of men because they looked at a woman, abduction of children, and to frighten them, just a series of horrible, horrible type of episodes that occurred. And 8 Alabama bishops, well, let's correct that, 6 Alabama bishops. One was a rabbi, there were 8, and a Catholic sub-bishop prepared a letter to say that you, Martin Luther King, in Alabama, are an agitator, you are an outsider, you ought to postpone and leave things as they are. So King in jail, because he had been arrested along with a whole group of other people for nonviolent marches. And he wrote a letter. And I commend it to you because it's shocking in its information. But let me read one paragraph here. I should indicate why I'm in Birmingham, since you have influenced the view which argues against, quote, outsiders coming in. More basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their, quote, thus saith the Lord, unquote, far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns. And just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so I am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonians' call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial, quote, outsider agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. The letter is now become one of the historic, most important documents, and there are those who say that if the gospel, the Bible, were written today, this letter would find its place in among the gospels. And I commend it to your reading. The first part of the book is explanations, including Selma and events leading up to Birmingham and the events that led to the letter and subsequent events after the letter was written. So I commend it to your reading.